Welcome to our Gilfix Law webinar here today. We're talking about 2024 estate planning and other updates, what you and your family need to understand, what you need to be aware of, and some steps that you can take. So thank you so much for joining us. I am Mark Gilfix. I am here with Michael Gilfix, and we're going to take you through a very timely and important presentation here today. We're going to take questions at the end, so enter questions in the Q&A function. If you're watching this on YouTube, please enter questions in the chat function, sorry, in the comments, and we'll try to respond to those. And we'll jump right in. I think you might relate to some of what we have on the screen here today. Do you feel like the world is changing a little too fast? Are you worried about AI and misinformation and just all the technological changes that are coming? Are you worried about how they're going to affect you and your family, your kids and your grandkids' abilities to get work in a new and changing world? Do you feel like you're kind of vilified for a lifetime of hard work? Do you feel like you're now branded as the oppressor just because you've worked hard and have built some assets to protect your family, or have saved up some assets and want to be safe? Do you just feel overwhelmed and you feel like nobody is listening to you or nobody has your back? We hear that a lot from our clients, and we are here to be part of that team. But the world is pretty dark right now. This was literally a headline I saw today. This was CNN.com. The people paid to spot risks see a high chance of a global catastrophe in the next 10 years. Of course, the news is so negative now, and there's so much change happening. It's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. And it's really scary to think about the future right now. But I think there's two quotes that, Mike, you pointed out that I think really define how we want to look at this.
Yeah. When Mark had that other slide that he wanted to share with everyone, I said, wow, that's negative. I mean, obviously that's negative. But here's these words reflect our thinking about the work that we do for you. Number one, the best way to predict the future is to create it. Very famous quote. You can be proactive. You have control. Don't give it up. There are so many tools. We look at our world in a very limited way, in a sense, when we do our planning. Your family, your kids, your grandkids, and what are the opportunities that present themselves? Bountiful and so many. And then the other great quote is from Mahatma Gandhi. And he said, the future depends on what you do today. So again, if that doesn't reflect the work that we do and a way to deal with the potentially negative future, we can take protective steps. So let's learn about some of them today and make sure that we do them. We're very optimistic about the impact of the work that we do for you.
Yeah, and we're here to help. We want to be part of that team in a very uncertain and scary world. Control what you can control. I think that's what we want to emphasize. Control what you can control. So when there's a lot of stuff that's swirling out there, we can't control elections. We can't control tax laws. We can't control international conflicts. We can't control oil prices or inflation. But there's a lot that we can control, and that's what this is really about. So I think it's important to set that stage. I know these are high-level legal concepts, but they connect to your family's future. And it is our mission to let you know what you can control. I think there's so much ignorance out there. So on that note, why don't we jump to the specific topics that we're gonna cover here today. So 2024 estate planning issues. So we're gonna cover some changes to Medi-Cal and long-term care rules. 70% of Americans need some form of long-term care. After the age of 65, you need to understand the rules around getting help from the government. Medi-Cal in California, some new major changes to estate and gift tax rules. We're going to talk about some crucial planning deadlines on the horizon, some issues, some drop dead deadlines that if you don't act before them, millions could be lost and never recovered. We're going to talk about, if you've followed us before, we always talk about California property tax issues and Prop 19, where the law is, what you can do about it, and what you can do to protect your property. We're going to talk about a very new law that you need to be aware of as well. If you've ever created an entity, if you own a business, you have to be aware of the new Corporate Transparency Act. We're not going to spend much time on that. We just want to flag it for you and some high-level points about that law. Implications of the upcoming election. Mike and I are going to have a little discussion, maybe debate about what we're really watching closely at both the state and federal level and what you need to keep an eye on and what those implications could have, what those elections could do for your own planning, what they mean for your own planning, and then steps you can take. There's a lot we're going to go over here today. We can't go into everything in a a huge level of detail, but we want you to just know what's out there, and we can be, of course, part of that team, but we want to give you some checklist items, some issues you should be aware of. And of course, this is for educational purposes only. This is not to provide legal advice. We have to work with you directly to provide legal advice. So don't try this stuff at home, but I hope you get a lot out of this. And as we mentioned before, leave questions in the Q&A function. We'll get to some at the end. And if you watch this on YouTube later, leave comments. We'll try to respond to those. Like the video. Share this with anybody who you think needs to see it. Maybe it's your parents, your grandparents who need to see this, or just friends who need to see this as well. So why don't we jump in, Mike? Why don't you lead us through some key changes? And actually, let me just take one moment. For those of you who don't know our firm, we are Gilfix and the Pole Associates. Many of you know us. We've been around for over 40 years now in the Bay Area. We've been featured in the national media, Wall Street Journal, USA Today. We do a lot of videos here, lots of articles. Mike's written a few books. We've co-authored some books. But it is our mission to be part of your team and to deliver extraordinary value and return on investment. So we've been around a long time. We work with thousands of California families, and it is our mission to spread the word. And actually, one last intro note, Mike. Just some additional thoughts. I think we've kind of covered some of this, but what are you thinking these days?
Yeah, we really want to emphasize that we're focusing on changes in the law, changes in numbers today. But think about it this way. Your world has changed as well. It isn't just that only the laws have evolved in 2024. You have too. The value of your state, hopefully, has gone up, not down. Opportunities, challenges as well, but things that we can address. We really think hard about Prop 19. It isn't just tax law. It isn't just property. It's like the impact on your family. So we want you to think about how your family is evolving. How's everybody feeling and thinking, and how are they doing in 2024? Have things changed? Are there new issues that you have to address? Are there any health changes in the family? You, parents, kids, grandkids, they have a dramatic impact, obviously. And the last point we emphasize and reemphasize is it is a scary world. We can take so many steps to protect ourselves. So with that in mind, let's look at the cost of long-term care. We have some really dramatic developments. I mean, this is one of the only in California points of law, only in California. Okay, so we're going to talk about Medi-Cal, which is California's version of the federal Medicaid program. Among other things, it's the only program that can pay for all or a portion of the cost of long-term care. So what does it mean, and what are we talking about here? So first of all, it has been the case forever since Medi-Cal has existed that there have been asset limitations. You couldn't qualify unless your assets were under a certain amount. We've written books about this, worked in this field for since the Medi-Cal program has existed. So we're intimately familiar with all of the planning options. We've planned for many of you who are watching, no doubt. So what has changed? Well, everything has changed. It's a whole new world. No longer is there a cap on asset values as a condition of qualifying for Medi-Cal. I mean, it's dramatic. I mean, it's hard to believe. Even as I say it, I doubt it, even though I know it's the case. So if you previously applied and were rejected because you had too many assets, well, it's time to apply again. If you have any level of assets, but you feel Medi-Cal could be appropriate or helpful, now is the time to apply. It isn't, of course, that simple. There's going to be a whole lot of other considerations that we have to take into account. One of them is that while income does not affect eligibility, the level of income does significantly affect the number of dollars that the Medi-Cal program will pay toward your cost of care if you or a loved one happens to be in a skilled nursing facility in particular. So we're worried about this. And let's take we have the words up here, billionaires on Medi-Cal. Well, it's astounding, but that's the case.
Medi-Cal.
That's the case. I mean, y'all come. Anybody can apply for and become eligible for Medi-Cal. If you are a billionaire or a very wealthy person, your income, the money you get every month, will probably wipe out what the Medi-Cal benefits might be. So it's a practical matter. Medi-Cal is really not going to be there for billionaires, but you'll qualify. It just means that you might not get any benefits from it. It's not simple. By the way,
and what happens if everybody's eligible? Then where's the funding going to come from? If everybody can get Medi-Cal, as we've talked about, Mike, when you and I discussed this, there's already a shortage of nursing home beds, really, for many families who are looking for it. And there's a bigger shortage of nursing home beds that accept Medi-Cal. What happens when even more people are eligible, right as the baby boomer generation is reaching the age where they're going to need long-term care? So what do you think about that, Mike?
Yeah, and I'm part of the boomers. You know, there are millions of us, and we are coming, we are aging, right? And
Yeah.
as Mark said earlier, those of us over the age of 65, 70% of us are going to need some form of long-term care. We're living
Yeah.
longer, many of us, and that does mean that there's perhaps a greater likelihood that we'll need a higher level of care. We have to think this through. A whole other topic is, should you get long-term care insurance? If so, what type? Should you get a hybrid? Should you look to Medi-Cal as part of a plan, not the core plan, but part of a plan? So our worries are, yeah, that with more and more people being on Medi-Cal in a skilled nursing facility, in a
Yeah.
particular facility, keeping in mind, though, that virtually everybody in that facility can now convert from private pay because they have too much money. They can now become eligible for Medi-Cal. I mean, everybody in your neighborhood nursing home that takes Medi-Cal could be eligible for Medi-Cal and get it right away. So that means that the nursing home is going to get less money every month because the Medi-Cal reimbursement rates are lower than the private rate. You know, maybe that sounds good, but we have to be circumspect and think about the implications. Is that facility going to stop taking Medi-Cal? They can. They're not required to accept it. If
Yeah.
they decertify, they have to keep people in the facility on Medi-Cal there as long as they live on Medi-Cal. But for the future, not so. So we're very concerned about what the long-term implications are here for quality of care, for the quantity of beds and other providers. And simultaneously, by the way, California just said, you know, these things, we kind of love them conceptually. Um, uh, uh, those who are not legal citizens are now going to be covered by Medi-Cal in California as well. That adds a few million people to the rolls. So yeah, you know, we want people to have health care. We really
Well,
do,
and
but we have to
what
be
does this
practical
mean?
and think about it.
Right. So what does this mean for family? I think it's thinking holistically about long-term care and not just relying on that, thinking about, as you mentioned, long-term care insurance, financial planning, making sure that you have your own safety net. Because even if you are eligible for Medi-Cal, how are you going to find this help? So any additional, and Mike and I co-authored a book about this, Facing the Reality of Long-Term Care. It's pictured here. It's available to our clients. It's also available on Amazon, although we're going to make some big updates to that soon. But just tying this all together, Mike, what are your thoughts as to what families need to think about in 2024 when it comes to long-term care?
Well, you know, I think about the concept that we're developing, where we're going to be teaming, where we are teaming with financial planners, insurance professionals to make sure that everybody really understands all of the options. So, Medi-Cal is a new opportunity, but it's extremely complicated. If anybody thinks it's simple, oh, gee, I'll get Medi-Cal now, no worries. Not the case for so many reasons. We still have to integrate our family vision. What do we want? Do we want to stay at home no matter what? Is that going to be more expensive or less? Uh, so it's comprehensive. We have to think about all of these tax issues. And again, everybody's different. There's no one plan that fits everybody. So
And I
it's
think this is
complicated. It's doable.
Yeah, and I think this is where talking to your kids, multi-generational planning. Mike and I have given talks about this. We've published articles about this. Talking to your parents or your grandparents or talking to your kids about this ahead of time is so crucial. But your estate plan is a big part of this. You have to make sure the right people are named in your estate plan, that you anticipate these issues as much as you can. So you have to make sure your power of attorney, your trust, your advance directive are all up to date. But we're in a new world, so let's make sure that we're all up to date and in a good place.
And let's be really clear, by the way, yes, Mark has had that talk, as have his sisters,
Yeah.
with me and their mom. We walk the
Yes.
talk. Talk the walk,
Yeah,
walk the
we
talk.
have. It's not an easy talk, but and we have other talks on our YouTube channel where we go into this in more detail. So let's switch gears a little bit. 2024 estate and gift tax changes and some critical deadlines on the horizon. So let's jump right in. Uh, these numbers are big, and you might think, well, Mark, these don't really apply to me, but I'll tell you why they might be more important to you than you might think. In 2023, the estate tax exemption was $12.92 million per person. That meant that you could pass up to $12.92 million to your kids without any exposure to the estate tax. Any dollar over that limit was taxed or is taxed at a 40% rate. So it's a very punishing tax, but only if you exceed that limit. It's only on dollars over the limit. 2024, This was indexed with inflation, so it went up to $13.61 million per person. So it actually went up this year. So you can actually give between a couple over $27 million to your kids in gifts or bequests without a penny of estate tax exposure. Now, if you're over that, you have the 40% tax on all dollars exceeding that. The annual gift exemption, a lot of people get confused about these two numbers. This is how much you can give away every year without even reporting it to the IRS. And that was $17,000 a person in 2023. In 2024, it's $18,000 a person. It also went up with inflation. So again, these are big numbers, 12.92 million, 13.6 million. What deal? You could be pretty high net worth, especially as a couple, and still not have to really worry about this. So, well, first of all, I'd say if you're over this limit or approaching this limit now, you definitely need to worry. And if you're over it now, talk to us. We can help you. We got to do some planning right away. But let's say that you're not at these limits and you're significantly below them. And you're like, why would I worry about estate taxes? Well, here's why you have to worry. There's a cliff coming. We talked a lot about how the future is uncertain. We don't know exactly what's going to happen, but this looks very, very likely. There is a cliff. And January 1st, 2026, barring a major change in law before then, the estate tax exemption, the amount that you can pass tax-free, is going to drop by 50%. It is currently indexed with inflation to $10 million per person. It will become indexed with inflation to $5 million per person. So with inflation, it will probably be around $7 million per person. So, okay, that's still a big number, right? But maybe not as big as you think, depending on where you are. And you need to be aware of this deadline because there's a lot that we can do ahead of that time to protect quite literally millions and millions of dollars. And if you don't act before then the law changes, you're screwed. Once it's lost, you can't get it back. So let's just talk about who needs to be worried about the estate tax deadline. If you are single and you have a net worth of $5 million or so or more, you need to worry. And if you're a couple and you have a net worth of around 10 million or more, you need to worry. And I get these are still big numbers. Maybe you're out there, maybe it's just not an issue. But keep in mind, your estate is made up of more than you might think. All the equity in your home. If you own a home in coastal California, parts of San Diego, Orange County, Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Marin, the home alone might get you close to that 5 million if you owned it for a long time, or if you have a normal single family home. Property values are still rising every year. Your estate's probably going to grow as the exemption shrinks. Let's hope that the stock market, the economy stays strong. But the stock market had a great year last year. It was up significantly. I know the year before that wasn't so good. But over time, the stock market tends to go up. So if you are close to these limits, this could be a big issue. And there are millions and millions of dollars at stake. So what can we do about it? So let's say you're not maybe at the limit, you're getting close to it, or maybe you're over the limit, or maybe you're over where the limit will be in a couple of years. What are some of the steps that we need to take? There are so many, I would say. So first of all, this is not intended to be complete, but Mike, why don't you just talk about some of the techniques and some of the issues that you need to be aware of if you're facing this and what we can do about it before that deadline?
Sure. And I think, the 2 points to emphasize are, number one, the cliff is very real. Planning opportunities will disappear on January 1, 2026. So those with larger estates, you really have to think about this and you really have to tackle it. Millions of dollars are at stake. Okay. The other point that's a preliminary for those with larger estates is that there are so many things we can do to use what's called discounting, to reduce the value of your estate in the context of a estate and gift plan. So if we have a situation where, let's say, these are high numbers. This isn't everybody, but just to get the concept. If you can pass along 27 million before the cliff with good planning, with discounting, with utilizing entities and fractional shares and other things, it's really 30 to 35 million that can be passed along. And we have a number of clients who are seeing us about this, and it's very real, removing it from the estate before the problems emerge. So overarching, it's powerful what we can do. Now, there's something called a slat. It's the second bullet point here. It's not the only thing you can do, but this is a way in which one spouse can take about $13.6 million and put it into a trust for the other spouse. And that $13.6 million is forever removed from the taxable estates of both. It's there for the other spouse, keep in mind. And then when they pass, it really goes into dynasty trusts. We always use dynasty trusts for the benefit of the kids. So again, the slat is a way of taking advantage Not the only way, is one of the way of taking advantage of this opportunity, one spouse for the benefit of the other. You can also fund these dynasty trusts for your kids right now, using this up to this limit, removing that money from your estate forever,
Yeah.
and you've saved a fortune by doing so.
And it's just to point out, it's use it or lose it. So I think Mike alluded to this, but you can't give away 50% of the exemption in 2025 and then it goes down by 50%. Say, oh, wait, I didn't use 50%. I still have that left, right? The IRS doesn't care what you still had left last year. All that matters is how much you gave away compared to the current limit. So if you gave away 7 million in 2025, you had 7 million left. 2026 drops, you lost it all. So you have nothing else you can give tax free. So use it or lose it. The deadline is upcoming. Sorry, we'll get back to the techniques. And this is just a very surface level summary of the techniques we can use. But sorry, Mike, any other thoughts?
Gee, there's so many in our book. We're going to have a screenshot of our book in a moment. We have a chapter. I have a chapter in the book, chapter 11, that summarizes not all, but most of the techniques that we utilize to dramatically put tax planning on supercharges. We use fractional share discounts. Let me give the simplest example there. Again, don't do it at home. It has to be integrated with the dynasty trust planning for the kids and grandkids. If somebody owns a house worth $1 million and you give it away to your kid, you made a gift worth $1 million and you used up $1 million of your lifetime credit. Okay, not a terrible idea. You get the asset out of your estate, let it grow in your kid's estate. But if you instead give a 90% interest, that interest for tax reporting purposes is not $900,000, even though mathematically it is. And the reason is that the new owner of a 90% interest, perhaps your kid or a dynasty trust, they can't sell the property without you. They can't get a loan. They're limited in what they can do with that asset. And the IRS accepts that because it's right. It's legitimate. So the question then is, how big of a discount can we take? Let's say it's a 30% discount. That means that instead of reporting a $900,000 gift by that transaction, you'd be reporting a $600,000 gift, making $300,000 of the estate disappear for estate and gift tax planning purposes. So you can see higher numbers, how powerful that can be. We can use that concept when we have entities like partnerships and LLCs. It's on and on. It's a matter of, again, integrating things and making sure that they're done on a multi-generational basis, because it's usually about the grandkids, right? Usually it's about saving things for the grandkids.
That's actually an interesting factoid I read recently, that the average age that people inherit from their parents is 60 years old. So really, when we do this multi-generational planning, it's the grandkids that get the biggest benefit. It's usually much later in your kid's lives. But if you have issues or questions about this, talk to us. Right? Reach out to us, gilfix.com. Our book, Beat Estate Tax Forever, that Mike authored, is available for $25 on Amazon. But we also give copies to our clients. So of course, if you have questions about this, talk to us. Let's set a meeting. We are already getting a lot of clients setting meetings in 2025 ahead of time, because I can guarantee you we are going to be crazy busy then. So don't wait to the last minute. You need to address these issues ahead of time. So let's transition to an issue that I know is on a lot of people's minds, if you're a property owner, as well it should be, which is Prop 19 in California and what you need to know about property taxes if you own a home and or other properties in California. So if you watch any of our videos, you've probably seen we talk about this a lot. Some of our most viewed videos, over 145,000 views for one of our videos about this, is on Prop 19. We know there's a lot of misinformation and ignorance out there. We're going to talk about legislative efforts to potentially change this, but you need to be aware of this law. It is the law in California. If you own property in California, you need to understand this in 2024. So, Mike, why don't you go through the high level summary of what Prop 19 is and what people need to know about it?
Sure. So, we're all familiar with Prop 13. The older we are, the more familiar we are with Prop 13 from the 70s. Rolled back our property taxes, pretty much froze them, only a 2% increase per year. We see people every day where they're paying $5,000 or $10,000 in annual property taxes, where the house is worth $3, $4, $5, $6 million. If they were purchased today, it'd be $60,000 in taxes. So it was a dramatic change, very beneficial for for every property owner, by the way. It wasn't limited to older people. All right. Then we had Prop 58 as another relevant point of history. And it said that you could pass along your residence to your kid or kids, regardless of whether or not they live in it, no property tax increase. Prop 58 also said that you can pass along other property, a rental, a vacation home, Also to your kids, as long as the assessed total value is under $1 million. So you might have a cabin at Tahoe worth $2 million, but the assessed value is 400,000.
Cabin.
That would
Right.
also not have a property tax increase under the old law. Okay,
Mm.
and then comes Prop 19 and wham, all of that changed. Let's look at the two circumstances. First of all, what if it's the residents? Okay, there's been some horrific misinformation. San Jose Mercury, frankly, published 2 articles saying that if your child lives in your home, there's no property tax increase when you pass. Not true. That may be the case, but it may not be. If your child makes your residence her residence, then the first $1 million in assessed value is forgiven, which
In fair
many
market value.
communities.
1 million in fair market value is not
Yeah,
reassessed.
sure. So let's take a simple example. If property taxes are now 5,000 and the house is worth 3 million, if your child moves in, instead of reassessment to 3 million, it would be reassessed at 2 million, 1 million forgiven. So the property taxes would still increase to about $24,000 a year. It's still a dramatic increase. If your residence goes to your kid or kids and they don't live in it, complete reassessment. If it's worth 3 million, property taxes become about $33,000, $34,000 a year. So there's incredible misinformation and misunderstanding about this. What about that vacation home? That
Or the
rental? What
rental
about that?
property, more importantly, I think, that you want to support your kids.
The which?
A rental property. What
The
rental or
rental
vacation
property, the
property? Yeah.
vacation home, yeah. No exceptions whatsoever. So when you pass away, you have to understand what your market value is, and that's going to determine what the new level of property tax is going to be. Go to the $3 million example. It's a rental. Property taxes go from maybe $5, $8, $10, $12,000 a year, $3 million up to $34,000, $35,000 a year, and then it's going to increase by 2% each year. It's a
We'll show an
dramatic
example of this in a
change.
second. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark will illustrate this nicely in just a moment.
Yeah, and imagine this, if you don't plan for this and your property goes to your kids, property taxes go up by 1,000%. What if you have a rental property and it's in an area where there's rent control, which is a lot of California now? They might be in a situation where they are not allowed to raise rents, but their property taxes go up by 1,000%. What happens? Are they forced to sell? If that happens en masse, are property values going to collapse? I mean, this is something we're thinking about. We're talking about legislative updates, but there are attempts to make it even easier to put more rent control in right when property taxes are going to skyrocket for a lot of families. So this brings us to what I'm going to give one example here about the numbers, because we love to share this because I think it's really crucial just to see in real numbers what the impact can be. So this is a spreadsheet that we use a lot. This is the assumption here, as Mike alluded to. Let's say there's a $3.3 million home, which in lots of California isn't even that big a house. It's crazy how valuable some real estate is or how expensive real estate is. This assumes a $300,000 assessed value, and this assumes that one of your kids does live in the home after mom and dad pass away. So this gets the $1 million in protection from reassessment. But here, if we don't plan ahead, if we don't protect from this increase, we're talking about, if you see in the lower right part of this slide, over 5 years, that's an extra $114,000 in property taxes. Over 10 years, $240,000. Over 30 years, almost $900,000 in extra property taxes for one house where the child lives in it. Now, if the child is not living there, or if it's a rental property, add $10,000 a year to that. And that goes up every year by 2% too. So it's a massive, massive problem. And again, what if you have a rental property, you want to rent something out, and there's rent control, and so you can't even raise rents, and your property taxes go up this much. So we have to plan ahead. So we've given, you see, I have the talk here that we gave a few months ago. That has over 100, I think at this point, 145,000 views. Watch that video to learn more if you'd like, but most importantly, meet with us. If you're worried about this and you have properties that have very low assessed values, talk to us, because we have developed solutions. Our talk here today is not focused on how we approach that, but we do have solutions. We've helped hundreds of California families to deal with this problem. And there's no one size fits all solution. You have to be aware of property tax issues, capital gains tax issues, estate tax issues, but we have developed solutions. So we have the Gilfix and the Pole Dynasty LLC. Francis LaPole, our tax guru in our firm, has developed some amazing solutions. So create the future. I forget the Peter Drucker quote. We're going to get back to those, but don't wait for the future to happen. Don't wait on California voters to bail you out. We'll talk about our thoughts about Prop 19 in the upcoming elections, but don't wait on voters to bail you out. If you're concerned about this, take action. We can protect that home and that rental property. Gilfix.com, easy to find us about this. We can very efficiently look into your situation and talk about solutions. So I think on that note, let's transition to a new law that we think you need to be aware of. You may have heard a little bit about this. It's called the 2024 Corporate Transparency Act. We're not going to spend much time on that here. We might do another talk on this. We're just studying this law now ourselves just to get a better understanding of it. But in a very high level summary, and again, not going to spend much time on this, but I think it's important you understand if you have an entity like an LLC or a partnership, this is a new law you need to be aware of. It came into effect on January 1st, 2024. It's really intended, I think, to prevent money laundering and to prevent nefarious bad actors from hiding behind corporate veils to hide what they're doing. But this applies to LLCs, corporations, other entities. There are some exceptions here. Again, not going to get into too many details, but it requires reporting about the beneficial owners, those who own or those who control entities, to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN. Among other pieces of information, you have to give names, dates of birth, addresses, social security numbers. There's actually a website they've set up to submit some of this information. And there are major penalties for not complying. So if you already set up, I'll talk about the deadlines momentarily, but if you've already set up entities, and we've helped some of our clients set up entities, we'll be helping them. If you've already set up entities, you need to be aware of this. You need to file this information soon. And if you file a new entity in the future, you're going to need to be aware of this. And as we've talked about before when we're doing estate tax planning, we often will use entities. There are partnerships or LLCs for estate tax planning, and sometimes we'll use that for property tax planning. This is just another step that we have to take. You just need to be aware of it, because if you don't file this information, the penalties are very strict. There's even criminal penalties. You might be in jail. I don't think that'll happen very often, but someone they're going to make an example out of at some point. So what are the deadlines for the Corporate Transparency Act? Well, if you create an entity before January 1st, 2024, you have a year. So we have until the end of 2024 to file that information. If you create a new entity after January 1st of 2024, you have 90 days to enter that information. So if you create a new entity, you have 90 days to report this information. So just be aware of it. If you work with us on creating entities, we're going to be working with you to help make sure that this is all reported. But for those of you out there who have entities, be aware of this. There's going to be new rules, I'm sure, emerging about how exactly you file this information. But just be aware of this new act, Corporate Transparency Act in 2024. Let's transition to the implications of the 2024 election. Let's talk about the implications of the 2024 elections on your estate planning and on planning for your family. And I just want to point out, this is an image from 2022 from the elections, and they talked about no sign of a red wave. Why am I displaying that now? It's not 2022 anymore. I bring it up because according to the historical models and the way that we looked at elections, 2022 probably should have been a red wave. If you looked at history, and you could often look at how's the economy doing. If it's doing well, the incumbents win. If it's doing poorly, the outsiders win. And 2022 didn't really follow that pattern. It was expected that Republicans would have a huge wave. They did obviously gain seats in the House, and they had some gains, but it wasn't anything close to what we would have expected. And I bring that up because we don't know what's going to happen. I think you can throw a lot of the historical playbooks out the window. So what do we need to keep an eye on? And I think there's a few state initiatives that we're keeping an eye on, and potential new laws in California, and of course, the federal election. So before we even talk about this, I want to just make it clear. Do not rely on voters. Do not rely on Congress to bail you out. If you are going to face a big problem, whether it's Prop 19 or estate taxes, and you're worried that something might happen before anything changes, don't wait. Do you ever want to rely on Congress for anything? Like, Congress can't get anything done. Do you want to rely on California voters? I can't remember the last time California voters didn't approve a tax increase. I mean, maybe that'll change. but don't rely on voters. But let's talk about what we see on the horizon. So let's start with Prop 19. We know there are efforts to repeal this. There are people gathering signatures now to put a Prop 19 repeal on the ballot, and a lot of people are upset about Prop 19 because many of them saw our videos and they see, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was such a big tax increase. But I don't think it's the slam dunk that a lot of people think it is. That even if it makes the ballot, and it's not clear if it's going to make the ballot yet, maybe it will. What are your thoughts, Mike? If it would actually get repealed, what are the forces at play here?
Yeah,
We talk about this a lot.
sure. As more and more people experience Prop 19 and learn this aspect, by the way, there's many aspects of Prop 19 that we all like. We're not going to get into those. So it was a complicated initiative. This property tax issue, I think, is the most significant, but it's not the only one. So that's
Well,
a
it lets you
complicating
move.
factor.
Yeah, it lets you move more easily within the state and keep low
Oh,
property
yeah,
taxes if
yeah.
you're
Some
HPCO.
of
There's
it's
some very
apple
good
pie.
things about it for
Some of
homeowners.
it's
Yeah.
so good. There's no question about that. Okay.
Yeah.
So will it be repealed? So number one, again, as people experience the hit and think they're going to be able to hold on to the house and it turns out they can't, they're going to be upset. They're going to be angry. They're going to talk to friends. So more and more people are becoming aware and they will want to repeal it and they will sign the petition. But then comes the campaign. And let's be realistic. There will be some powerful forces advocating for its retention to keep Prop 19, this property tax aspect, in place. Two of the most significant are number one, realtors. When Prop 19 became law, public record is that about $42 million was spent to advertise it and support it. Of the 42 million, 39.5 million came from the Realtors Association. Why? Because Prop 19 dramatically increases the likelihood that more property is going to have to be sold. It was an investment. Call it a political investment. It was successful. And they're not going to sit back and just let it be undone. So indirectly or directly, they're going to be advocating for the retention of Prop 19. Second, and I actually think this one is even more important, the government employee unions, teachers unions. What Prop 19 does is it dramatically increases tax revenue at the local level. So if you're a teacher, if you work for for any of the governmental entities, you see this as a greater likelihood for ultimate raises and increases in compensation and benefits and so forth. So they have a direct stake in its retention. And be realistic, how many people are voters and how many people own property? If you're a tenant, you don't have a lot of sympathy here, even though frankly you should, because it's going to result in dramatic rent increases unless it's a rent control area.
Unless it's rent control, and there's a lot of
Very
rent control. We'll talk about
complicated.
our rent control measures in a moment too.
Let's, the last thing I'll say is there have been some poster children for Prop 19 in the past. I think it was the the Bridges
Jeff
family,
Bridges,
where they
yeah,
owned this
yeah.
multi-million dollar property in Malibu. And they inherited that property with no property tax increase, and they rented out for like $30,000 a week. So you can't feel sorry for them. And that is a situation that's not ideal. I don't think anybody would say that that's fair. So forces are at work here, not a slam dunk.
Not a slam dunk. Exactly. And for many people, the $1 million in protection is enough for their home to go to their kids without an increase in taxes. And when you get away from coastal California, property values aren't quite as high, and that $1 million in protection may be enough. So, we obviously have huge criticisms of this law. We think it's going to create a lot of challenging situations, but let's not rely on that. So don't wait for things to happen. If you're worried about this, talk to us and we can help to prevent this issue.
Let's give it another peg to hang this on. We say this so often. Hope is not a plan. If you're thinking, oh, gee, I hope it'll be repealed, especially if you were a parent or older and you have property, you don't hope and think, oh, this will get fixed. That's not good thinking. That's not planning. Be proactive. Deal
or
with
more. Yeah, I like to say hope is not a strategy, or plan. That was from my management consulting days. But yeah, exactly. Don't rely on voters. Hope is not a strategy. Create your future. Let's talk about another measure that we're keeping an eye on. And that is an attempt. I don't know the name of this yet, but I believe it is already on the ballot. And it's an attempt to repeal the Costa-Hawkins Act. Now, it's the second bullet point here. What do we mean by that? So there in California, there is rent control spreading. More and more cities are passing rent control ordinances. So we simultaneously have this issue of Prop 19, where people might inherit, a rental property. Property taxes could skyrocket, and they might be unable to raise rents by more than 2% a year, even though their costs are skyrocketing. Maybe there'll be some exemptions there. But right now, cities, even Berkeley, cannot impose a rent control rent control on single family homes or properties built after a certain date. The Costa-Hawkins Act was passed in the 90s in California, and it was intended to protect single family homeowners from ever being kind of kicked out of their own houses or not allowed to go back to their own houses if they rent it, but also to encourage new development. So it said, look, if you build a new apartment building after a certain date, the state is not allowed to impose, localities cannot impose rent control. And if it's a single family home, they can't impose rent control. So there are attempts to repeal this, to make it so if you ever rent out your house, you can't raise your rent more than 2% a year if you live in Berkeley or Oakland or many parts of California. Right now, they can't do that. But so we see this attempt to repeal Prop 19, but we also see an attempt to increase the ability of cities to impose rent control. So we see the politics of California moving in so many different directions. That's why it's so hard to predict. So keep an eye on that. There's also, I see a new ballot measure where I think the state legislature is trying to reduce the percentage needed for certain types of tax increases. A lot of tax increases require 2/3 majority, 67%. They want to reduce that, surprise, surprise, to make it 55% only needed for these super majorities to pass more tax increases. There's even talk in California of passing a wealth tax. And of course, they're going to start with the billionaires, but just watch. If they pass it, which I don't think would pass constitutional muster, because I think you'd have a bunch of billionaires fleeing California. But of course, the number is going to come down and down and down. And think about, again, when we think about, are these laws going to pass, these tax increases or not? Who left California in the last few years? There's been an exodus. I think it's slowed down. Hopefully people are moving back. But higher net worth people and more conservative voters have generally left California. What does that mean? It means the electorate, if anything, has probably leaned a little bit more to the left. So whatever your political leanings are, it's just a fact that it's probably more likely that tax increases are going to be approved and that things like Prop 19 might remain law. So we don't know for sure, but keep an eye on this. And of course, the federal elections, let's talk about that. We talked about the estate tax cliff that's coming on January 1st, 2026. How could it, there's a chance that it might not happen, right? But that would take a major act of Congress. And this is because the existing law, it sunsets. So if Congress does nothing, the exemption drops. It had to sunset. There's some arcane rules around budgetary laws that required this when they originally passed the original law that increased the exemption. So what does that mean? It means that there would have to be an act of Congress passed by all three branches to change the exemptions. That means that one party would have to control all three branches, the Congress, the Senate, and the presidency. But even if they do, they might not get their act together to pass things. Democrats controlled all three branches a couple years ago. They talked about changing the tax code. They barely did anything about it. So Mike, what are your thoughts about the possibility that the estate tax cliff may or may not be coming?
I think maybe it's a chance in 20 that we're going to avert that. So let's even assume just for a moment that Republicans have the presidency and the Senate and the House. Just think about tax now, not other issues.
Yeah,
just think about tax for a moment.
It's not good.
So is there a likelihood that they would deal with the estate tax, which I think is about fifth on their list of issues? And even if they were to have a proposal that seemed viable, the Republicans are fighting amongst themselves as much as the Democrats are fighting amongst themselves. So the likelihood of them coming together and passing anything substantial in the world of tax, my God, it is so unlikely. Again, just objective, not choosing sides on anything here, just being a realistic observer of our current reality called politics. So again, we don't think it's going to change.
Right. And if there's any split, if one party controls the Congress, another party controls the other two, then there will be no change.
Even more
nothing will pass. Yeah. So, and if you have questions about this, enter them in the Q&A function. I see a couple people have raised their hands. Enter your question in the Q&A function. We're going to get to those in just a second. If you have thoughts about this, you're watching on YouTube, what do you think is going to happen with the estate tax exemption? What do you think is going to happen in the 2024 elections? Your guess is as good as ours as to who's going to win what. So anyway, I think we need to be aware of all of this and don't rely on voters. Don't just think, oh, well, it'll get changed before then. I mean, it's possible, but don't gamble with your entire net worth and with your hard-earned assets.
Yeah.
So I think let's get to some key action items and what you need to be aware of and some steps that we really think you need to take. Let's go back to slides here. Let's sum things up as we get into 2024. What are some crucial steps that you need to take, and what are some of the issues you need to be aware of? Just a checklist type thing. So I think the first thing we want to point out here is estate planning is not a one-off process. It is not get a trust done and you're done. This should be a process that takes place over time. Your situation will change, tax laws will change, It's about building a trusted advisor team for you and your family. You need to have that team, your financial advisor, your attorneys, your accountants. They should all work together, talk together as much as possible. Again, we're building that network for some of our clients, but you need to have that family office in place. I know family office means ultra high net worth families have had teams of their own personal advisors for generations, but we don't think only the ultra high net worth families should have these teams. Everybody should have their trusted advisor team. And we, of course, would love to be a part of that. But we want you to be aware of all these issues and how there's a lot of interplay. Your financial planning, your insurance planning, your tax planning, they all relate to your estate planning and protecting your assets in a very scary and changing world. So let's go to some specific checklist items that you should just be aware of. So do you even have a comprehensive estate plan in place? Do you have a living trust? Powers of attorney, advance directives? Do they address tax issues? They address asset protection issues? Do you have family protection trust, dynasty trust in place for your kids if you have kids to protect them from divorce, lawsuits, estate taxes? Do you have a child with special needs? Do you have a special needs trust in place? We want to make sure that you have all these tools in place. And if you have some of these in place, when was the last time that you looked at them? Has it been a few years? So make sure that you're taking an up-to-date look at your estate plan, your trust structure. We've given other talks about this. Do you have an AB trust? Do you not have an AB trust? Do you even know what kind of trust you have? That can have huge implications on your family's future when it comes to estate taxes or capital gains taxes. And it's very fact specific. You know, every family situation is different. There's no hard lines where we say, if you are in this financial situation, this is what you need. We need to get to know you, and we need to understand, whoever you work with, they need to understand your specific situations to make sure that you have the right trust structure, the right people named, and that you have the right tools in place to protect everything you work so hard for. So if you have a larger estate, you know, again, $5 million net worth, if you're single, $10 million net worth, that's big numbers, but in California, there's quite a few families that are in that area. You need to be aware of the coming estate tax cliff. There's so much we can do ahead of time, but once that deadline comes, we lose that opportunity. Don't lose that opportunity. Do you own property in California with low assessed values, so low property taxes? Again, hope is not a strategy. Don't wait on California voters to bail you out. Maybe they will, but let's at least be aware of the issues and aware of the tools that are in place to protect your hard-earned properties. And if you reviewed your financial plan, again, if you have a great advisor, great. Make sure you're on top of these issues with them. If you don't have one, talk to us. We're building an amazing network of some trusted advisors. But either way, make sure one hand is talking to the other. Your estate planning team is talking to your financial advisory team. We can, of course, help with it all. We'd love to work with your financial advisor. If you have one, who's great. We meet new advisors all the time, who we really like. But talk to us if you have these issues. Gilfix.com, easy to find us. And I want to make sure that you overcome the 3Ds, the danger of delay and denial. Some of these might resonate with you. Like, I'm not going to worry about protective trust for my kids. They're never going to get divorced, right? Never divorces, or I'll get to this later. I already did a plan. I don't need to think about this. I already have it. I have documents on the shelf. I did an estate plan. I'm good. An estate plan should be a living, breathing thing. Take a fresh look at it every few years. Or I don't want to pay for this. I can use ChatGPT or a new AI tool. Okay, I mean, you could do that, but yeah, just don't rely on that. Don't try this at home. And again, this is not legal advice. You have to meet with us for to really provide you legal advice. So just be aware of this. And I want to circle back to the quotes that Mike brought up earlier. The best way to predict the future is to create it, from Peter Drucker. And the future depends on what you do today. Mahatma Gandhi, beautiful quotes. Let's think about that. Don't wait for the future to happen. Control what you can control. Control what you can control. So I know we hit on that a lot, but it's so crucial. There's so much we can't control. So stay connected with us. We, of course, would love to get the chance. We have a special offer we're going to talk about. So stay tuned. If you're watching this live, stay tuned. We have a special offer for those watching live. But join our mailing list, gilfix.com. Easy to join our mailing list. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like, comment, share it. Let us know if you have questions or concerns. We're going to get to questions in a minute too here for the live viewers. But we can help you. Don't miss this opportunity to protect all that you worked so hard for your whole life. A few steps now can provide, not exaggerating, millions of dollars in value to future generations, even if you don't consider yourself high net worth. In a time where I think many people feel vilified for having any assets, you need that team to look out for your interests. And we would love to be a part of that team. So very easy to find us. Subscribe to our Gilfix Law YouTube channel for more videos. But we'd, of course, welcome you if you're not already a client to join our client community. Easy to find us, 650-493-8070, gilfix.com /contact, or a number of ways to find us there. We are going to get to some questions. Yeah, go for it, Mike.
A really quick one is David asks if the Transparency Act, the reporting responsibility, is it's federal or is it state law? It is federal law. Millions of entities have this reporting. You just think about the management of that at the recipient level. Who's going to get these reports? Crazy making. Okay. Yeah. Another question is about the annual exclusion of $18,000. Can it be your kids? Can it be your grandkids? It can be anybody. But for the grandkids, I always and strongly recommend that you don't make direct $18,000 gifts to minor kids into these Uniform Minor Transfers Act accounts where they get the money at age 18. We strongly recommend the use of something called a crummy trust. It's a trust. So if you have a grandkid and you want to set aside money, you make an $18,000 gift to that trust every year. If you're a couple, $36,000 a year goes into that trust for the grandkid. And the beauty of it is it can last until the kid is 30, 35, 40, whatever you say. And the money isn't only for education, which is what a 529 plan is, education, health, housing. It's a wonderful tool to think about. So if you're a grandparent out there, I call that trust the grandparent's delight. Yes, we've set one of those up for our grandson, Miles.
Yes.
And let's see. Another question was about how often should you review your trust? And Mark actually alluded to that. Really every couple of years, because circumstances change. The law changes. You have changes in your family. You should check in. Change in who should be your trustee. One of the biggest reasons people come to us and make some changes. And fees, we had a question about the fee for a trust. For us, a trust is typically between $2,100 and $3,200. I mean, it just depends. Very mainstream, and we believe we do way over the top when it comes to way above average work.
Yeah, we always, and if you meet with us, again, we bill for meetings. Well, we have a 30-minute offer for special occasions, but we always will give you in writing what the cost will be to carry out the next steps. We want flat fees. We want you to know what the next steps will be. We had a question about the specific dates of the talks. So Chris, thank you for that question. I'm going to look that up. I should know this, but I'm going to look it up myself right now. While we get to the next question. So another question, someone commented, are you aware of the petition from the Jarvis Taxpayers Association repeal the death tax to repeal Prop 19? Yes, I think we talked about that a bit. We are certainly aware of it, and we're going to keep a close eye on it. But again, we don't want you to rely on that to bail you out. We know that many people are upset about Prop 19, but California is a very unpredictable state politically. So yeah, there are attempts to change that, but we'll see what happens. So I'm looking at the date. So Mike, any other questions you want to get to before I get back to
one other? In the context of Prop 19, the suggestion, I'll just summarize, is that, well, can I have my property in my trust? And my trust isn't going to die. I'm going to die. So doesn't that avoid the reassessment? Absolutely not. I mean, absolutely not. And even if you have it in an LLC, which also lives on, there's still reporting that ends up going to the county assessor's offices, and they find out about it, and there's a change in ownership. So these simple shortcuts seem appealing. They don't work. They just don't work. It takes some sophistication and multiple steps.
Yes, and the dates. And by the way, gilfix.com /seminars is how you can register. We have it on Thursday, January 25th in Palo Alto at 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. And then Tuesday, January 30th in Santa Clara at 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. You can register now. We're going to start marketing these pretty soon, but get ahead of the curve. You can register on our website. Gilfix.com /seminar. So I think on that note, we're coming up to an hour. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to offer new seminars and webinars coming up. Keep an eye out on our website for more, and our YouTube channel. We're going to be posting a lot more videos there in 2024. And again, thank you for spending time with us. We know time is so valuable. Attention is so valuable. It is a scary world out there, but I hope you and your family, as my mom likes to say, are staying safe, sane, and healthy. And thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We'll see you next time.
Take care.